Dara, thank you so much for that reading. I'm always very fascinated by this story. This is one where I would love to be a fly on the wall watching it happen. And I wanted to invite you today. Dara just shared Mark's version of the Transfiguration story. If you have time before the Super Bowl today, go home and read the Luke version and the Matthew version. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell the story, and each one tells it just a little bit differently. There's just a little nugget in each different one. Mark's is very simple, but Matthew and Luke they add just a little extra element. So in Luke, you'll notice that when James and Peter and John get to the top of the mountain, they're tired, and so they sit down and they rest, and maybe they're even dozing just a little bit when this transfiguration event happens, and Jesus, in Luke, his skin is glowing. Not just his clothes, but his skin too. And so they go from very tired and almost asleep to wide awake very, very quickly. In Matthew tells us that the disciples hear that booming voice that says, "This is my son, listen to what he says." And when they hear that voice, they're just so shaken and stirred by the power of it that they fall on their faces in awe. They fall on their faces in awe. A few weeks ago, I was nosing around in a little bookstore in Moab, Utah, and I found this book. I picked it up and bought it. It's called Awe, The Science of Everyday Wonder. It's by a guy named Dacher Keltner. He's a sociologist, and what he did is he traveled all around the world. He interviewed dozens and indeed hundreds of people from 26 different cultures all across the world, on every continent and everywhere. And he asked people, what instills awe in you? What leaves you a little breathless? What are those moments that sort of, you can't quite name them or articulate them, but they give you goosebumps? Let me ask the same question of you. You don't have to answer, but just think of a moment in your own life that gave you a sense of awe. I don't know what that is, but a moment in your life that just sort of gave you pause, gave you a sense of wonder. And as we're talking today, and by we're talking, I mean as I'm talking today, hold that moment in your heart and reflect a little bit about it. Dacher Keltner's book is a fascinating read. He not only asked people and interviewed people about awe, he also studied with physiologists the physiology and indeed our psychology when it comes to awe. What happens in our bodies? What happens in our minds when we experience moments of awe or wonder? And what Dacher Keltner writes is this: awe is the emotion that we experience when vast mysteries that we just don't fully understand occur. Awe reveals that our current knowledge is not up to the task of making sense of what we've encountered. And then he examines the things that instill awe in people. And he basically categorizes those events into 8 different things, 8 different broad categories. You'll want to write these down for the quiz after the service. But one such category is moral beauty. When you see some great act of courage or someone who overcomes some incredible challenge or makes some sort of great sacrifice for somebody else, if you think about the people who stepped off of landing craft onto the beaches of Normandy, what a great act of courage, of moral beauty these people carried out. Or similarly, you know what February is, right? It's Black History Month. And so if you think about the countless stories of people who showed moral courage to help push our national narrative along when it comes to racial equity, and not just the leaders, but the tens of thousands of people who participated in bus boycotts or sat at lunch counters in spite of people hurling threats at them, or marched through southern cities even though Klansmen were watching. Some of them were public officials and were threatening violence against these marchers. That's moral courage that still gives us a sense of awe today. And it's amazing. There's what Keltner calls collective effervescence. That creates a sense of awe in us. And let me explain what that is. If you've been to a concert before and they turned out all the lights for a song, and if you were a boomer, you pulled out your cigarette lighter, or if you were a millennial, you pulled out your cell phone. And you all created lights together, kind of, waving to the beat of the song. Have you ever been in a concert where everybody knew the words to the song in the whole stadium or theater, and you all sang along together? That's collective effervescence. Gives a sense of awe. There's also this. There's a football game of some kind today. You ever been at a sporting event and done the wave? I mean, usually nobody starts the wave, right? Somebody starts it, but it's not like the announcer says, oh, we're going to do the wave now, so get ready. What they do is usually there's like 10 or 20 or maybe 50 really committed people who get it started, and it catches on, and pretty soon you have 30,000 people all going, woo, like that, doing the wave, going around the stadium. Most people do it better than me, but that's collective effervescence. It's this experience of being with other people and experiencing the same thing as a group, and it instills awe. Church is a great place for this, because when we come into this house of worship, we're all experiencing something together. That's part of what binds us together. Nature. Anyone ever experienced awe in the backdrop of nature? That's my favorite place. And I love the words of Brandy Carlisle, who sings just perfectly about this in Have You Ever? And don't worry, I'm not going to sing, because that's not going to create a sense of awe in anybody. But she writes, have you ever wandered lonely through the woods and everything there just feels just as it should? You're part of the life there. You're part of something good. If you've ever wandered lonely through the woods. Yesterday, I don't know if y'all experienced it, but there was just this little micro moments of awe. I was vacuuming the living room, doing my normal Saturday morning cleaning thing, looked out the window to see snow. It's nature. That's just a gift that arrives on our doorstep. Kellner has some other categories of awe. Music can create awe. Singing together, singing in a choir, great place for awe, right? Human design. When you go and see the pyramids of Giza, or incredible works of art or technological prowess, and it occurs to you just how incredible the human mind is. That's awesome. Of course, spiritual awe, having experience of the divine. Maybe one of the most profound ones is moments where we experience new life or death. So I always try to get to the hospital when a couple in my congregation has a baby, and I've never walked into that hospital room with two new parents and had them not in a moment of awe. I've never walked into the hospital room and them saying, oh yeah, baby's over there. It's a baby. It has fingers and stuff and toes. No, they're awestruck. Same thing happens at times of death. One of my very first visits to a hospital was when I was a pastoral intern at a church in El Paso, and it was what turned out to be the last day of one person's life. He was in hospice, and let me just tell you, this guy was a mean old guy. I saw him once dress down the pastor just with a harumph, because he was an usher, of course, and he, although we have great ushers here, don't hear any commentary there, the pastor changed the time of the offering in the service, and it messed with his groove. And he just, on his way out the door after that first Sunday, he crossed his arms so he would not be, he knew he was communicating, no, I'm not shaking your hand. And just gave this humph and walked out the door. That's this guy, West Texas oil man, and just tough and a hard exterior. And I walked into that hospital room on maybe like my third hospital visit ever. And he was the most gracious person I've ever seen with the nurses, with his family, just kind and gentle. And the nurses couldn't always make him feel good. The nurses couldn't always take away the pain, but he was so patient with them. Death brings out grief, but it also reminds us of the awesome nature of life. So these things give you pause, they give you goosebumps, they go beyond what we can articulate in language. Anne Lamott, she writes about this time she was talking with her grandson, and they were talking about God, and grandson said, I think we call God God because when you get to those moments that are just so amazing that you can't put words to them, what do we say? We say, oh my God. So that's why we call God God. I don't know if that's true, but I like it. I like it. And folks, the problem is we've lost our sense of awe. We've lost it. We're cynical people. We hear this report that Jesus glowed, that he changed, his clothes changed, and there's these booming voices. And, we say, people don't glow. If your skin started glowing here today, you'd know something was wrong. Skin doesn't glow. If it glows, there is something wrong. Clothes don't glow. We get cynical. Of course, the other way that we get cynical is in our time, all of our heroes get debunked. All of our institutions, we have a good way of questioning them. Not wrongly. A lot of times they deserve to be questioned, but it seems like there's always someone unearthing something unflattering, and we've lost our sense of awe. We get cynical. Fellow United Methodist colleague James Howell, he writes, let me just suggest to you, if you live in the vice grip of cynicism, if you live in a world where you refuse to believe there's only that there's nothing except cause and effect, I said that wrong. If you live in a world where there's only cause and effect, if you're only going to limit yourself to the reasonable and the rational, then you're going to have a very skinny soul. You're going to have a very underfed soul. Because if there's only cause and effect, then there's no real reason to dream. There's no real reason to hope. And there's no place for awe. Since the Enlightenment, that era in the late 1700s, early 1800s, when we discovered being rational, which was a good thing, by the way. But since that time of Enlightenment, the assumption has been that if it's not rational, it's not valid. And of course, we shouldn't be irrational people, right? We shouldn't want that. Sometimes church is a place that's not rational, but that's not just universal. That's not just true of church, it's universal. We don't want to believe in ghosts. We don't want to believe in the boogeyman or superstition. We should want to be smart, curious, discerning people who understand the world around us. But, if we're just going to wall off rational and say that's the only thing that's valid, and let me just tell you, folks, love is not rational. Hatred is not rational. War is a completely irrational thing. And so if we're only going to approach the things in our lives that are rational, then we're just going to wall off huge sections of the human experience. We're going to wall off awe. We'll end up as something less than human. The stuff that makes us human, it's not that it's irrational, it's just that it's bigger than our rational minds. It takes awe to approach it. But we're a cynical people, and we complain, we get angry, we feel shame. There's no room for awe there. Those things just crowd out awe. And there's one last thing I want to point out in the Keltner book. Like I said, he interviewed people in 26 cultures, all different kinds. And with all those people, hundreds of people in different places and cultures, he said out of all of those people, when he asked them what instills awe, nobody said money. Not one person. I mean, it's weird how that works, right? Not one of them across 26 cultures named anything that they bought. No one said, my cell phone. No one said, this app on my cell phone. No one named a TV show or Facebook or social media. Those all come from a world of our creation. What people did report is when they were awestruck, their egotism, their self-criticism, their judgment of others, their anxieties all of them settled down. These are the emotions that mark our times. And they all settled down when they were experiencing awe. If you're in awe, it's hard to be critical of someone else. So I think maybe God likes that. You know, Jesus, there's this story that Dara just shared. It's where Jesus is skin clothed and there's this voice from heaven. And I wonder if it was this moment that crystallized for the disciples who were present who Jesus was. Did they finally just get it when it came to Jesus and understood his nature in some way that they hadn't before, and the nature of God through Jesus? I mean, Peter wants to mark the moment. He says, let's build a temple. Let's build these little booths, these little shelters for these three miraculous people, Jesus and Moses and Elijah, and then we'll always remember what happened here. And Jesus doesn't really seem to go along with it. Jesus doesn't want that distraction. We're at the beginning of this season of Lent. And for a long time, I thought Lent just seems like this season where church people say, well, it's springtime and it's getting warmer, but you should still be sad or serious. That's not what Lent is. Lent is this season when we cultivate awe. Some people, you ever give something up for Lent? Yeah, I know people that don't eat meat during Lent. I know people from other traditions that mark it in different ways. There are things all of us could probably give up for Lent that would help us to get ready for awe. So remember how, people across 26 cultures, none of them said that their cell phone cultivates a sense of awe? Maybe that's a distraction. Maybe if we were to give up our phones, at least to the extent that we can, that would help. A couple of weeks ago, I was in western Utah visiting on this particular day, I was visiting one of the national parks, and a genuine crisis happened in my life. I got about a mile down this trail in Arches National Park, and it occurred to me I had left my phone in the car, okay? This was an emergency. I was walking with these two other people from Canada that I just sort of bumped into, and I was sort of visiting, and I gasped when I thought about the fact that I had left my phone in the car. They thought I had stepped on a cactus or something or stubbed my toe. And I was like, no, it's so much worse than that. I left my phone. I was on that trail for 4 solid hours without my phone. But I survived, okay? I even had a good time. But I got back to that car, and the first thing I did was got straight into the car to check to see what I'd missed on my phone, which was absolutely nothing, of course. How do we disconnect from the things that distract us so we can connect with God? How do we slow down like that? And I want to leave with this, and I will just tell you, this thought is not fully articulated in my mind yet. I'm still fumbling around with it a little bit, but I want to throw it out there and just see where it lands with y'all, because I've noticed something else when it comes to awe. A lot of the older people that I know, and I just noticed this, a lot of the older people that I know, people in their 80s or their 90s, I know a lot of older folks around that age who have this sort of switch that happens where all of a sudden they're curious in ways that they weren't before. One of my neighbors, she's 85, she's taking a weaving class. And it's not because she's going to spend thousands of dollars on a loom and start a weaving empire of some sort, but it's because she's just curious, and it's not just about the mechanics of weaving, but I was talking to her not long ago, and it was sort of insights she was getting from the act of weaving. It's as though the older we get, the more we can appreciate the mystery of the world around us. That's awe. That is not to romanticize aging, which is very hard, and that's also not to say that everybody does it. I can also think of some older people that I know and some younger people that I know that just think they have everything already figured out, and if you happen to make a mistake about something, they are all too happy to correct you on it and tell you how wrong you are. If I ever get like that, you just feel, you heard it here, you can just come up behind me and give me a good hard kick in the behind, because I want to be a curious person. I don't want to be someone who just always knows how it's supposed to go. Maybe that's why Jesus tells, or seems to poo-poo Peter's idea of building these shelters, these monuments. It's like Jesus is saying, we don't have to define what's happening right now. Let's just be in it. Let's just experience it. Sometimes that's true of us in church too. A lot of times in church we act like we have all things figured out. And I think maybe those are the moments we're most confused. That we feel like we need to go to the world and tell them what all their problems are and be the moral police and pray this spiritual prayer. And is there anything worse than being 9 o'clock in the morning and you get a knock on the door and it's two church people asking you, if you died today, do you know where you'd go? There's something a little backwards about that, about the certainty of that. And maybe the better thing is to show people how much there is out there that's sacred, that God has just littered the ground around us with. Maybe all we need to do is do a better job of cultivating awe in people's life. And it's Lenten time. And we could just slow down. We don't have to figure out everything. Just create a sacred space where we can be quiet. Because curiosity is where awe lives. Jesus is transfigured. You know what the Greek word is that's used there for transfiguration? It's metamorphosis. If you think about that concept, the butterfly, maybe that's what Jesus does with us, as he takes that crusty world of our own creation, that little cocoon that we always live in, and helps us to pry the pieces away so something wonderful can emerge, and to see it and experience wonder. Thanks be to God for that. Let us pray. Oh, gracious God, we're all so certain. We feel like certainty is this armor that we can put on and go out into a scary world and use it to fight off the things around us. But help us to lay it aside. Help us just be in those sacred moments where we encounter you in a new way and be grateful. Amen. In case you didn't notice, I just spent 20 minutes talking around the subject of awe without naming it. That's okay, because it's one of those things where you just have to go out there and be open to it. And I'm here to tell you, I think actually St. John's is a great place to do that. This is not a church where you have to be certain. This is not a church where if you don't believe like me, or you're the neighbor sitting next to you in the pew or anybody else, then you have a problem. It's a place where we can grow together. And so if you're someone who wants to grow in their own spiritual life, I think this is a great place to do it. After the service, if you have questions about that or what that might mean, I'm available right after the service. Matt, the other staff, your friends around you here in worship, we are all here to help you in that journey. And if being a part of this church is helpful, then don't miss the opportunity.